With the testimony of William Mullins, Commonwealth prosecuting attorney Robert Bruce had finished presenting his case in the trial of Dr. Marshall Benton Taylor. But the question is, was Prosecutor Bruce successful in presenting his case? Bruce had called a total of 23 witnesses to the stand, and just from reading the transcript, most had testified to events that did not help him build his case. Instead, many of the witnesses testified to events that seemed to have helped the defense present their case. Of the first 6 witnesses, only Jane Mullins had testified to anything useful to the Commonwealth attorney. But on cross-examination, the defense lawyers had relentlessly pounded Jane. They had brought up the problem with Jane's timeline, but mysteriously the transcript shows no follow-up questions to her given answers. Although, on redirect, the prosecution asked a question about Jane's horse. This is yet another interesting question in the transcript, as if there were no follow-up questions about why it had taken nearly 4 hours for her to ride 7 miles, there would have been no reason for the question about the horse. The defense had asked her repeatedly about the statements that she had made to multiple people about the massacre. They had even gone so far as to ask her about the statements that she had made to the grand jury. Those statements had contradicted what she had testified about. By exposing all the contradictions between Jane's testimony and what she told family, friends, neighbors, and the grand jury after the massacre, Dr. Taylor's defense lawyers had completely discredited Jane as a witness. What's more, with their relentless questioning, they had shaken and rattled Jane to the point that she had stated, quote, that she told what suited her and when it suited her, unquote. Although we are left to guess what the defense lawyer had asked her, this statement and the sequence in which it occurred gives one the feeling that the statement may have been blurted out, almost in anger. Either way, this statement was damning. Jane Mullins had woven a tapestry of statements which began 4 hours after the massacre. This late arrival home had been the first out-of-place thread in her story. Where had she been? Nobody had seen her on either side of the mountain, and why had it taken her 4 hours for her to ride 7 miles? The defense team had pulled out every loose thread in her story, and by the time of the re-cross-examination, the tapestry she had woven was threadbare. Whatever the defense had asked, it was enough for her to break down and to admit that everything she had said since she had arrived back home at 4 p.m. on May 14th was tantamount to a lie. This is the reason that we assert that Jane Mullins had perjured herself on the witness stand. Trying to establish a motive. The prosecutor then presented 17 witnesses trying to unsuccessfully place Dr. Taylor at the crime scene and to establish a motive. Indeed, several of the prosecuting witnesses had testified that Dr. Taylor had been seen in the vicinity of the Pound Gap. The road through the Pound Gap was the main road connecting Virginia and Kentucky, and it was heavily traveled. The problem was that although several witnesses had reported sightings of Dr. Taylor, none of the witnesses were able to place Dr. Taylor in or around Pound Gap on the weekend of the massacre. Indeed, almost every testimony about Dr. Taylor appearing on or near Pound Gap Road had occurred either the weekend before or the week after the massacre. Only one witness had reported seeing Dr. Taylor anywhere on May 14th. Unfortunately, that witness had been Jane Mullins, and now her testimony was in doubt. Prosecutor Bruce also tried to establish an unstated motif of animosity between Dr. Taylor and Ira Mullins. Although he was able to present several witnesses who testified to this animosity, on cross-examination, the stories these witnesses told fell apart. Each of them admitted that the testimony they had given were about events that were more than 2 years old. What's more is that each of the witnesses, when pressed by the defense, admitted that the testimony they had given about the statements and actions of Dr. Taylor had occurred during the normal execution of his duties, working as a revenue agent for the U.S. Marshal Service. In fact, none of the witnesses had testified to any statement or action taken by Dr. Taylor against Ira Mullins over the last 2 years, or since Ira had become a quadriplegic. However, several of the prosecution witnesses had testified that, whether through animosity or holding a grudge, Ira Mullins had been trying for nearly 2 years to hire someone to kill Dr. Taylor. Our questions. It is upon these well-documented facts, easily found when examining the transcript of the trial through the lens of hindsight, that over the course of a 10-year investigation, we continued to ask ourselves two questions. Was the Commonwealth prosecuting attorney, Robert Bruce, successful in presenting his case? Or is it possible that there was no case to be made against Dr. Taylor to begin with? The June indictments. The evidence against Henry Adams, Dr. Taylor, and the Fleming brothers was circumstantial at best. A small pile of shell casings found hidden under a pile of leaves. Henry, along with James Potter, had been named as suspects at the time of the crime scene investigation. This was because of the type of ammunition casings found at the crime scene. Interestingly, Henry was indicted on June the 3rd along with Taylor and the Fleming brothers, but James Potter was never indicted. Yet, the transcript of the trial and the often told story invokes the name of James Potter at least a dozen times. Yet Potter is not even called to testify, even though testimony is given that key information originated with James. As we have just discussed, the prosecution had called 23 witnesses, yet only the testimony given by one witness was able to place Taylor and the Fleming brothers at the crime scene. That, of course, had been the unreliable and discredited testimony of Jane Mullins. The indictment issued on June 3, 1892, by the May 26 grand jury had included Dr. Taylor and Calvin and Henan Fleming, based solely upon the testimony of Jane. But that testimony was now in question, thanks to the answer that Jane had given to a question that the prosecution had asked in direct phase of Jane's testimony. Jane had stated that she had been told by James Potter that, quote, Taylor and the Fleming boys were lying around her house trying to kill her, unquote. As we shall soon see, we shall begin to present the case with the defense. That answer is very similar to the testimony from Sarah Blevins. Testimony that will place Jane's testimony about Taylor and the Flemings in serious jeopardy. Other evidence. Then there is the shell casings and the rifle of Dr. Taylor. The original indictment, dated June 3, 1892, had stated that Dr. Marshall Benton Taylor had used a gun valued at $5 to kill Ira Mullins. That indictment was quashed on a technicality. Originally, the complaint was made that one of the original May 26 jurors was an industrialist. When that ruling was denied by another jury, a complaint was made that the foreman of that jury had recently served on the grand jury. The indictment was thrown out and another indictment was sought from the July 26th grand jury. This time, the prosecution had pistols owned by Dr. Taylor in evidence, and the indictment reflected that. However, other than the change in the date of the grand jury indictment and the word pistol, nothing else had changed on the indictment, which now stated that Dr. Marshall Benton Taylor had used a pistol valued at $5 to kill Ira Mullins. Problems with the case. Thanks to the overzealous, young, and untried prosecutor, he immediately ran into problems with what he may have thought was an open and shut case. He had the man, he had the eyewitnesses, he had the evidence, no matter how circumstantial, and he had the murder weapons. Or did he? Dr. Taylor arrested. When Dr. Taylor had been arrested, he had been carrying his Gladstone or doctor's bag. According to the newspaper articles, inside the bag, among his medical equipment and a few articles of clothing, were the two biggest and ugliest pistols you ever saw. These were, of course, Dr. Taylor's famous twin pistols. Dr. Taylor was brought back to stand trial on July 26, 1892. He made his first appearance in court on August the 2nd. The trial was eventually moved from the county court to the circuit court, which was to begin in September. The reason often given is that the defense is unprepared for the new indictment. But was that really true? Time to prepare the cases. Prosecutor Robert Bruce had nearly 6 weeks to prepare his case for court. He presented his first 6 witnesses, and from reading the transcript, he expected that, as far as he was concerned, these witnesses would win his case. The first 2 witnesses would talk about the crime scene investigation. The first would introduce the evidence against Dr. Taylor, the 6 spent bullet casings found at the crime scene. The transcript says that those casings were 45 by 75, but there was ample evidence that all 6 of these first witnesses' statements had been altered. But we know for certain that the shell casings were not 45 by 75 due to the affidavit of I.N. Mills, who tells us that they were indeed rimfire, just as the often told story tells us. The next witnesses tells us the makeup of the party and the events leading up to the massacre, as well as the first few moments as the shots rang out. John Harrison Mullins barely escaped to tell this story. The next 2 witnesses tells us about the event that happened in April of that year in which someone shot into Ira's home in Virginia. We learn from both only part of the story. In fact, a great deal about it is left out. Both Prosecutor Bruce is only looking for one bit of evidence from this tale. A bullet was recovered from the bed of Ira Mullins. Bruce asked Jemima Harris about this bullet, and she states it looked like a .44 round to her. Bruce then asked if she was aware that Dr. Taylor owned a set of .44 pistols. Although it is not recorded, it is safe to assume that Dr. Taylor's pistols were introduced at this time. These pistols were a Colt .45 and used ammunition that were center fire. They did not match the shell casings found at the crime scene, nor did they match the statements that they had just been made by Harris, or the question about the pistols made by Bruce. In fact, this will be the last time in this case that we hear about the pistols. Epic blunder. In any modern case, if a blunder of this magnitude had occurred, the defendant would have asked for a mistrial. We can only imagine that it had occurred here, but it was denied. We know that the defense had made a document of 12 exceptions about this case that was supposed to have been attached to this transcript and sent to the appellate court. But we assume that this blunder concerning the pistols was on that document. After Jemima Harris, all the questioning is about the rifle. Even though the rifle had not been entered into evidence and would not officially become part of the case until the defense began wrapping up its case. The last of the first 6 witnesses. The next and last of the first 6 witnesses was, of course, prosecution's star witness, Jane Mullins. As we have just shown, Prosecutor Bruce may have been ill prepared for this case, but the defense came prepared to hunt bear. We have already discussed the problems with Jane's testimony and how the defense had shot her story so full of holes it would have been used as a colander. The thing is, during the presentation of the case, the defense had discredited Jane's testimony using her own words. Now, as they begin presenting the defense's case, the defense will continue to discredit Jane and her testimony. And they do so with the introduction of Sarah and Matt Blevins. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living want to thank you for watching our series on the Killing Rock. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell for notification. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky Tennessee Living as we bring to you the history of the Appalachian Mountains. We must remind everyone that the story names Killing Rock, The Oft-Told Tale, Killing Rock, The Untold Story, Killing Rock, The Trial, and Killing Rock, The Defense are all under Kentucky Tennessee living copyright.